Good morning, everybody. 33 days to go until Brexit. We're due to leave at 11 p.m. on March the 29th, and it's been quite a week in Westminster, really, with the formation of the independent group and eight Labour MPs and 3 Conservative MPs joining it. For the Labour people, it's, well, the party's gone too far to the left, the anti-Semitism's horrible. But actually, what unites all of the 11 is their total opposition to the referendum result back in 2016 and their desire to have a second referendum. But also over this weekend, another series of events that I think perhaps leave some questions open for the Conservative Party. And that is, of course, that 3 cabinet ministers very publicly, Amber Rudd, David Gauke and Greg Clark, very publicly now saying that if Mrs May cannot get her deal agreed in Parliament, that Article 50 should be extended, which it seems to me goes very against government policy, very against the Conservative manifesto, very against indeed the wording of Article 50 for which they all voted. Well, helping me through this morning is somebody who has seen one or two of these battles before. Indeed, the last time the Conservative Party had a really big convulsion over the European Union was back in the mid-1990s, and Sir John Redwood actually stood against the leader of the day, who of course was John Major, the Prime Minister. He's still in Parliament, he's the MP for Wokingham, and he joins me this morning. Good morning, Sir John.
Good morning, Nigel.
Now tell me, are you heartbroken to see that Anna Soubry, Sarah Wollaston and Heidi Allen have left the Conservative Party?
Well, of course, I'm unhappy and disappointed because they joined me in fighting the 2017 election on a very good Conservative manifesto, and that manifesto made it clear that no deal is better than a bad deal, and it made it clear that we would have 2 years to negotiate a future partnership as well as our withdrawal. The implication was if we hadn't done that, we would just leave, and I'm very sad that they deviated from that. I'm sticking to it, and I hope all other Conservative MPs will stick with me and stick with the manifesto.
Now, there's obviously a huge amount of coverage and massive negativity around this concept of a no-deal withdrawal from the European Union. I mean, are you entirely comfortable if we get to this point where Mrs May's deal can't be agreed, can't be amended? Are you happy, Sir John Redwood, leaving on a no-deal basis?
Well, I've always told people, and I'd said it before the referendum as well as after the referendum, repeated again in the 2017 election, that you have to be prepared to walk away without signing their withdrawal agreement or a partnership agreement if the terms aren't good enough. And this withdrawal agreement on offer is totally unacceptable. It suffered massive defeat in Parliament from all parties, and rightly so. So yes, of course, but it's grossly misrepresented, Nigel, as you well know, and as you're implying. It's not no deal. We will leave with all sorts of deals and agreements. We already have agreements against that contingency to make sure that planes fly, trucks move, ports operate, trade continues. It's as much in their interest as ours, and all those agreements are now being drafted or have been agreed.
And there is an argument that says that, and you know, I know Juncker and Barnier pretty well, of course, from all my time in Brussels. There is an argument that says that actually they're the ones that are pretty scared of us leaving on these terms, and that if we were to take off that option from the negotiating table, our chances of getting anything out of Brussels in the next few weeks would be reduced to zero. And yet we have publicly 3 cabinet ministers saying we should extend Article 50 if there's no agreement. And we're told, and all right, you can, take Sunday newspapers with a pinch of salt, I agree, but, we're also told that David Lidington and indeed the Chancellor are lobbying the same way. I mean, how is it credible for a Conservative Prime Minister leading a Conservative government to have a significant minority of her own cabinet arguing against the stated position of the government?
Well, that's often the case. You've been in politics for long enough and watched enough governments. Cabinets often have big divisions over big issues, but they normally agree to stick together in public and have their disagreements in private. What's disappointing on this occasion is that 3 ministers have come out and contradicted the Prime Minister and the official government line, and I think they should apologise and put the record straight if they wish to stay in the government. This government has lost a lot of ministers over the last couple of years over this Brexit issue, mainly people from my side of the argument who did the honourable thing, didn't like all the compromises being made and resigned. And then that means the Cabinet doesn't have enough people in it representing the views of the 17.4 million, the majority vote in the referendum. And Mrs May has got to correct for that. She's got to stand up for the 17.4 million because she's got too many people around the government table who don't agree with them.
I mean, to get back any shred of credibility with the negotiators in Brussels, isn't it a fact that Mrs May now needs to sack these three cabinet ministers who so publicly have gone against her position, the government's position, and indeed your own manifesto?
Well, if I were her, I wouldn't sack them. No, I think that would be a provocation in a difficult situation. I think they should be expected to bring their words into line with the official government position and confine their disagreements to around the cabinet table, and I look forward to pressures being exerted to make sure that happens. And I can tell you that there are many of us backbenchers who, when we're sitting behind them and being asked to offer support to these ministers, are going to be extremely unhappy if they haven't, by that stage, corrected the record and adopted the general government line.
Well, given that there could be a vote in the House of Commons this week on the Cooper-Bowles amendment to extend Article 50, they've got about 48 hours, haven't they, to get into line?
Well, indeed, and I presume they will be voting with the government and with the rest of us against any attempt to delay. I mean, the manifesto was crystal clear. It said, and I quote, "We believe it is necessary to agree the terms of our future partnership alongside our withdrawal, reaching agreement on both within the 2 years allowed." So it ruled out absolutely any delay beyond the 2 years and went on to say, of course, you'd leave with no deal if there wasn't a good deal agreed and on offer.
Now, the way this debate's changing, of course, is that it's people like you that will, of course, get blamed for delay if you don't vote for her deal. You can see the spin on this already. But what are the implications? Because we've seen a big split emerge in the Labour Party this week. Of that, there's no doubt, and they're in real trouble in many ways. But what are the implications, in your view, for the Conservative Party, for the credibility of the party as a party of government, if we finish up with an extension to Article 50?
Well, I and many like-minded people are going to defend the rights of the majority and what we said at the general election to make sure we don't end up with a delay to Article 50. And that also would, of course, require the consent of the EU, who would say, well, what's the point of it and what's the price going to be? And it will probably require legislation which makes it extremely difficult. As to being blamed for any delay if I choose to vote against the withdrawal agreement, which I obviously will do, as I did last time, and that is just a complete nonsense, because the withdrawal agreement is delay. The withdrawal agreement is not a deal. It doesn't offer us anything by way of trading arrangements and future partnership. That's all to be sorted out later. The withdrawal agreement is the worst of all possible worlds. It unites Remain and Leave voters in opposition, and it would sentence this country to another 21 or even 45 months of the kind of troubles we've had over the last 4 or 5 months, with Parliament trying to grab the wheel, with the government split, with huge rows in the country, and a very weak bargaining position to try and secure anything from the EU. Why would anybody want to sentence us to that?
Does this not potentially split the Conservative Party, Sir John?
I think the main split is clearly in the Labour Party, where they have a very large number of people who don't like the views of the public. I think it's a very small number of Conservative MPs who want to stay in the EU and want to overturn the result of the referendum, and very few Conservative MPs who would think a second referendum at all appropriate. So I think it's much more a problem for Labour. But you've seen that there are about a dozen Conservative MPs who sought to thwart, delay or undermine the EU withdrawal legislation. But we managed to win through over that, and I trust they will not be able to do anything in the next 33 days which stops us leaving.
And finally, the most difficult question in British politics, what's going to happen? Are we going to leave on the 29th of March?
Well, I would encourage all your leave-inclining listeners by reminding them all that Parliament has legislated for us to leave on the 29th of March, and we have completed all the legal processes in international law, EU treaty law and British law to leave on the 29th of March. So that will only be stopped if a set of forces emerges in Parliament which doesn't merely pass an opinion or a motion, but changes the legislation. And that is going to be quite difficult for them. And many others were trying to stop them in accordance with the Conservative manifesto and the referendum result.
So if the Prime Minister holds her nerve, we will leave.
Indeed, absolutely. I think the government has got to hold firm, and then it's very difficult for the forces of Remain to be undemocratic and to stop the British people having their wishes fulfilled.
Thank you very much for joining us here on LBC this morning. That was Sir John Redwood, basically saying if the Prime Minister holds her nerve, we will leave on the 29th of March. But, we have these three cabinet ministers publicly going against the government's position, going against our negotiating position. And I think the question we've really got to talk about is why will Mrs May not sack these cabinet rebels so that we know exactly where this government stands? Please let me know if you agree with me. She should do it. Call 0345 6060 973. And maybe you think, well, actually, why on earth did she put Amber Rudd back in the cabinet in the first place? I mean, does she secretly herself support an extension to Article 50? Text to 84850. And maybe there isn't the talent left in the Parliamentary Conservative Party to replace them, in which case tweet using the hashtag Farage and LBC, at LBC, and of course, Facebookers watching this live, you can comment there too. You're listening to the Sunday edition of the Nigel Farage Show here on LBC, and it is 10:15. Open cabinet rebellion as three cabinet ministers publicly say that if Mrs May's deal is not approved, then no deal cannot be an option at all, and Article 50 must be extended. And we're told in the Sunday newspapers, and there's actually no reason to doubt this, that actually David Lidington and the Chancellor are doing much the same thing. Is it time Mrs May sacked them? And I just asked Sir John Redwood that very question, and he said, well, they need to come into line. But given that Tuesday and Wednesday this week is when the EU withdrawal is going to be debated again, and possibly a vote on Wednesday night on the very question of extension, I would have thought if they were going to come into line, Sir John, they better start doing it within the next half an hour or so. Why won't she sack them? Because there are some people that think that actually extension suits Mrs May, and the reason she allowed Amber Rudd to be reappointed to the cabinet is that Rudd actually is saying what the Prime Minister really wants. Now, you can write that off as a conspiracy theory, but I wonder also just what are the implications for the Conservative Party if they don't deliver Brexit and Article 50 gets extended. Keen to hear from you. Keen to hear from Steve, who's a new caller from Liverpool. Good morning, Steve.
Good morning, Sir Nigel. How are you?
I am well, thank you. Now, Steve, tell me, are you normally a Conservative supporter or not?
No, I'm not, Nigel, unfortunately. I've got no faith in either of the main parties, I'll be quite honest with you.
No, well, you're hardly alone with that, Steve, I can assure you. So, I mean, here we've got a Prime Minister, 33 days to go. She had her deal smashed down by Parliament by a stunning margin of 230 votes. She now needs to get concessions out of the European Union, Steve, and she's actually got her own side damaging her negotiating position.
Well, it's quite interesting, Nigel, because we've seen a precedent set already by the Brexiteers who've already left Cabinet and done the honourable thing, and yet we have foxes in the henhouse, shall we say, or are they foxes? We don't know that. We don't know. As you alluded to, it's quite possible that they are doing the groundwork for Theresa May to basically kill off Brexit or any real form of Brexit. The ramifications for the Conservative Party would be catastrophic. Would be catastrophic. People are talking about splits. I could see a split with the ERG, and that's a considerable split. Even if only half of them split away, that would devastate the Tory Party. And as you've also heard from Sir John Redwood, they are merely sticking to a manifesto. They are not the extremists. The extremists are the ones who are trying to stop Brexit.
Do you know, Steve, it's very interesting you say that, because at 11 o'clock, we're going to talk about this new independent group and whether they can succeed or not. But, I do actually understand when Chuka Ramuna and Luciana Berger from your city, when they say that actually this new style Corbyn activism is aggressive, it's unpleasant, it's extremely left-wing, it's abusive, it's anti-Semitic. I kind of understand that is a fairly good reason for leaving the Labour Party. But the idea there's some equivalence in the Conservative Party, when, as you quite rightly say, the ERG's biggest sin is to support the manifesto upon which they were elected.
Absolutely. There's no equivalence in the Labour rebels and the Tory rebels, because essentially the Tory rebels are complaining about Brexit, which could be possibly concluded within the next couple of weeks, in which case their whole raison d'etre, it becomes null and void because we've left anyway. The agreement will have been signed and sealed, possibly, in inverted commas, and in which case, what was the point in them leaving? What was the point?
Steve, you've made the point that, over the course of the last year and more, we've seen principled resignations from Cabinet. Assuming that these three that have broken cover don't decide to resign from Cabinet, should Mrs May sack them and send a signal?
Well, I think if she was being honest with the people, she knows that it's wrong to break collective responsibility within a cabinet. I mean, that's completely wrong. That just breaks every moral code in politics. If she really is determined to push Brexit through, she has to sack them. And if she doesn't sack them, that would give everybody a clear indication that they are actually doing her work for her.
Do you know what, Steve? I think that you've made that point beautifully, and I think if she doesn't sack them, people will begin to say that more and more. Great call, thank you. Andy says to me, after hearing what John Redwood said this morning, it's plain to see, if we do not leave on March the 29th, it's the Conservative government to blame, no one else. May has the choice to hold her nerve and lead us out of the EU. Yep, she needs to hold her nerve, I would agree with that, but she's got to act against these three cabinet ministers to retain a shred of credibility and to look like a leader. That is how it seems to me. John is a new caller from Croydon. Good morning, John.
Good morning.
So, what should she do?
I don't think she should sack them.
Right.
But I think she should remove them from the cabinet and then leave the choice up to them if they want to leave. But it's going to make no difference on the final vote, because they was always they want to stay anyway. That's what they want to do.
Of course.
They want to extend it so they say, well, let's forget all about it now, and then we'll be stuck with what I really found about was the European army.
Yeah. Which
really worries me greatly. It certainly does, because I remember there was a debate on TV about 3 years ago. It was you, Miliband and Clegg. Do you remember it?
I do.
And that's the first time I heard about it. You said they're going to form a European army.
Yeah.
And Miliband and Clegg both jumped on you, and Clegg especially was saying you was trying to cause trouble and all the rest.
Well, there was
of
an even better
example. Right, they were, but Clegg actually knew they was going to.
There was an even better
European
example,
army,
John,
because he was more in with with the EU than anybody.
There's an even better example, John, of that.
Said.
Back in 2014.
Was it that long ago?
Nick Ferrari, on behalf of LBC, hosted a public debate between myself and Nick Clegg, or Sir Nick Clegg as he now is, who was the Deputy Prime Minister, and it was an LBC-sponsored thing, and I made the same point about the emergence of a European army, and Clegg said I was a dangerous fantasist to even suggest it. So, hey, there we are. John, you're worried about the European army. You're clearly, a devout Brexit supporter, but you've now got a Prime Minister who keeps saying over and over and over, we are leaving on March the 29th. Goodness knows how many hundreds of times she said this in public, and she's got some of her cabinet openly challenging that. Isn't it time she acted, John?
Well, I've never been really sure of Theresa May, because, and I think we've got to blame David Davis for this, because he actually backed her. How can you have a Remainer running a Brexit camp when you voted to leave? And I can't see how you can possibly have somebody. She cannot be completely against Brexit. Well, no, she hasn't. She started off by saying no deal is better than a bad deal and all this sort of stuff. But then she's calmed right the way down, and then she signed last year for that ridiculous backstop. Which would keep us in it forever. They would never let us go.
We've been in trouble ever since then.
Once we're in that European army, that'll be it. America won't want anything to do with us, because they know the information we share will then go straight to Europe. And I can't see how Germany could possibly want to go with this, because they are in cahoots with Russia, because they've got pipelines, oil lines and gas lines direct from Russia
John,
to Germany.
one of the arguments,
country running.
One of the arguments that doesn't get made enough, of course, is that Remain is a dynamic thing, just as Leave is. John, I thank you for your call. Frank says the problem for May, she said over 50 times we're leaving on March the 29th. It would be devastating for her credibility if she didn't deliver. It would be, yes, Frank, a total failure of leadership at every level, but I think it would be seen as a betrayal by many of millions of voters. Patrick says, where are Liam Fox's deals? He promised us 50 by the end of March. I don't know, Patrick. We better ask Liam Fox the answer to that. But of course, the point is, Patrick, that if we did leave with what's called no deal, but as John Redwood said, actually, behind the scenes, all sorts of agreements have been made over the course of the last few months. But Patrick, my point on this for a long time has been we can leave on WTO rules, we can use Article 24 of the GATT Treaty, and that buys us at least 2 years of tariff-free trade, whilst we can, perhaps, on a more gentlemanly basis, sort out a proper future agreement. John is a new caller from Virginia Water. Good morning to you.
Oh, good morning, Nigel. Nice to speak to you.
Good to speak to you.
Nigel, there's a couple of points. First of all, I mean, Theresa May will never get a deal from the EU because they don't want us to leave. So why we keep trying, I really don't know. But if you were talking about the cabinet ministers who said they won't support a no deal, then really they should stand down. And also, I'd like to see Parliament put forward a motion that all the MPs that are representing constituencies that voted quite substantially in some cases to leave, they should also go for re-election.
Well, the concept of re-election, John, of course, is quite a big one after Chakarumuna this week and all the others. But
it seems to me that, if we talk about democracy, but that's the least thing, or democratic thing that these MPs are doing. They're representing people who've asked to leave, and they're actually doing their best to keep us in, which to me is unbelievably. They're really getting a job for being paid for something they're not doing.
But this Prime Minister, John, despite the fact she was a Remainer, she has told us from day one.
That is the major problem, and I did think at the time, we really should have had a Brexit Prime Minister. And I accepted her because she, the Mansion House speech, and she said, yes, we will, I'm going to see it through and all that. But of course, at the base of it, she must be a Remainer, otherwise she wouldn't have brought such a ridiculous deal to the table. I mean, items in there that keep us into the European Union for years, with no say at the table is ridiculous.
John, are you suggesting that the Prime Minister's conning us? Is that what you're saying?
Well, I think she has been so far. I mean, she's still hedging it out, but I think she's trying to give us a Brexit, but basically still tying us in, yes.
Well, John, I have to say, when I heard the Lancaster House speech she gave, and I was on LBC that night, and I sort of cheered her to the rafters, but then when I heard her in Florence talking about a close and special partnership with the European Union after we'd left, I knew we had the wrong leader. But hey, John, thank you very much indeed. You're listening to the Sunday edition of the Nigel Farage Show here on LBC. It is now 10:30 and time for the news headlines with Philip Chryssikos. Outright rebellion from 3 members of the Cabinet who are saying that if Mrs May's deal can't be agreed, we must take no deal off the table and we must go for an extension of Article 50. Well, the Northern Ireland Minister, John Penrose, writes in today's Sunday Telegraph, and he says the removal of the no-deal option now could torpedo Brexit completely. He warns that a temporary extension could become a permanent one. And I have to say, it's very interesting because John Penrose was a Remain voter, but now says we, the Conservative Party, have to deliver this. And what he's not saying, and what John Redwood wouldn't say, and because they can't say it, because it's their own party, but the real story is, I think, that if Article 50 gets extended, this is seen as a catastrophic failure by the Conservative Party, by a Conservative Prime Minister. In fact, I think many will think this is the betrayal of Brexit. And I believe this has very serious implications for the Conservative Party, but clearly Rudd, Gawke and Clark don't really care about that. What they care about is doing all they can to keep us stuck inside the EU's rules. That's what I think. If you think I'm wrong, if you're a Tory supporter who thinks that actually what they're saying is sensible, let me know on 03456060973. Though I did notice that the Prime Minister yesterday was in Oxfordshire addressing the voluntary wing of the Conservative Party, and they did have a vote there, and 80% of the people there said there should be no extension, and that, I think, is how Tory voters in this country feel. Tony is a new caller from Milton Keynes. Good morning, Tony.
Good morning, Nigel. I hope you'll give me a little opportunity to indulge. I have a tale to tell.
Okay.
I agree with you that these 3 ministers should have been sacked instantly. That is strong and stable leadership.
Mm-hmm.
I believe that we do not. I've been a member of the Conservative Party for over 40 years.
Oh, wow.
And we do not have a Conservative Prime Minister. We do not have a Conservative leader of the party. Now, over the years, yes, the Conservative Party has not wrapped itself in glory. However, I was at Birmingham University with Anna Soubry in 1977. I ran for the Federation of Conservative Students, leader for the Students' Union. I won on first past the post votes. I was defeated after the 5th ballot on a group of Trotskyites, far-left loonies. So be careful what you wish for with regard to voting reform. However, I am so supportive of what you have done. The fact that we've had this referendum, the fact that we want to keep the union together, the fact that we can be Great Britain again by believing in ourselves. And all these ministers and the Chancellor of the Exchequer and Theresa May herself have done is undermine the will of the British people. It is an utter disgrace. I'm utterly incandescent with rage today.
Tony, I agree with all of that, and I think it is this lack of belief in ourselves, this lack of belief in the country, this lack of belief that we're good enough to actually run our own affairs that is at the heart of this problem. Tony, you said you've been a member of the Conservative Party for 40 years. I want to ask you, how serious do you think this could be for the Conservative Party if Article 50 gets extended?
Extremely serious. My Conservative MP, who is Andrea Leadsom, Leader of the House, knows my name. She's heartily sick of my letters because as soon as there's another mess, I fire off a letter and explain. We would not have got to this position without the threat of a New Deal. And excuse me, even if we get rid of the backstop, the withdrawal agreement is still very flawed. It is not something we should sign up to. So the whole thing should be torn up. We should start again and just go forward believing in ourselves. And, quite frankly, when I saw this news about the Brexit Party, whatever, we need someone to hold their feet to the fire. We need to hold the balance of power so they will believe that 17.4 million people's rights should be protected. Where is the EU human rights on this? We have a right to expression. We have a right to self-determination.
Oh, Tony, you could even argue, the United Nations Charter says much the same thing. Tony, thank you for your call and your passion. Finally, can I just ask you, on a lighter note, or potentially a lighter note, what was Anna Soubry like 40 years ago? Oh, he's gone. I've lost him. Right, I'm going to go to Thailand. Good Lord. Another Stephen, a new caller from Thailand. Good morning, Stephen.
Yeah, hi, good morning, Nigel.
Good morning, or good evening, I suppose it is for you, isn't it?
So, pretty much, yeah, getting there.
Yeah. So tell me, these cabinet ministers clearly are not going to come to heel, as John Wedgwood wants them to. They're clearly not going to resign. Amber Rudd was let back into this cabinet. Her behaviour is no surprise whatsoever. Is it time Mrs May finally looked like a leader steering a steady course?
Well, I think the first thing to note is, a couple of things is, I think firstly, this can't be the first that she knows of these three guys that want to stop Brexit. She must have known for quite a while, so I think there's a bit of a clue in that. But yeah, she definitely should sack them. But also the other thing that I find interesting is if it's meant to be a collective responsibility with the cabinet, then sorry to sound a little bit conspiratorial, but I'm just wondering whether it is actually the collective view to actually extend and therefore maybe cancel Brexit. I know it sounds like a little bit of a conspiracy theory, and I'm not normally into those, but it's starting to...
I tell you what, Stephen.
Like I tell you what. She must have known for a while,
I tell you what, you say that. I mean, I've just literally just got this text in, Stephen, as we were talking. Chris says to me, because this is a planned strategy to delay or cancel Brexit full stop. The Tories never wanted Brexit, and they've done their utmost to overturn the consensus. Utter betrayal of the electorate. It's kind of what you're saying too, Stephen, isn't it?
I think Jacob Rees-Mogg was right. I think it was last year or maybe even the year before when she said the whole problem is that she's a Remainer deep down, which doesn't mean that you need to get conspiratorial, but what it does mean is that she won't view Brexit in a positive way, and I think that's what's happened. She's trying to get the softest possible, so therefore she can get as close to how she really thinks. So I think his words are very good. She's not viewing it positively; she's viewing it as a problem to tackle.
Yes,
and I think this is what underlines everything. So I wouldn't be surprised if she's known for a very long time, or maybe even if it's part of her own collective view, but she can't appear to be saying that because she maybe wants some positive deniability or something.
Well, there's quite a few of you. There's quite a few of this Sunday morning saying that. And Stephen, just finally, let me ask you: what do you think the implications could be for the Conservative Party if they finish up going down the extension route?
Well, hopefully that they'll split up, and then there'll be a new party formed, and one of those will actually be real Conservatives, like your previous caller was saying. You know, the problem is that a lot of the Conservatives are not really Conservative, you know, sort of something that Peter Hitchens always used to go on about, the fact that Conservatives are not really Conservative. So I wouldn't say hope as in I'm hoping for the disaster, but if it does happen, then hopefully one of the split-offs will be a proper Conservative right-wing, not extreme right-wing, not far, but just right-wing, because, you know, that's not it shouldn't be a dirty word.
Oh, it is these days. It is these days, Stephen, but I know exactly what you're saying, a real Conservative party, and there isn't really one at the moment, not with this leader. I think that's probably true. Thank you. Ava is a new caller from Wincanton in Somerset. Good morning to you.
Good morning, Nigel. It's great to finally get through to you because I've been trying so often. But anyway.
I'm sorry about that. Well, anyway, you're through. Welcome to LBC, and the floor is yours, Ava.
Well, I wanted to ask you a question, actually, Nigel, and that is, does Mrs. May's deal mean that we are not able to negotiate any other tariff agreements with other countries?
Mrs. May's deal puts us into a period where we have a transition period to negotiate a new relationship. But during that period of time, whether that's to the end of 2020 or the end of 2021, more likely, we will not be able to sign any new trade deals. And here's the truth of it, Ava. You know, my friends across the other side of the pond in America who viewed Brexit in a very positive light because they thought there could be a fresh start to the Anglo-American relationship, the very earliest we could possibly have any form of new trade deal with America would be at least 6 years after we'd voted for Brexit.
Well, in that case, that's seriously going to damage our economy. So that means that the Remainers can all say, see, we told you Brexit was going to damage the economy.
Yes.
The economy is the most important thing, really, and we need to be free to negotiate immediately with other countries and try and get trade deals and make Britain a good place to invest and start thriving economically. I mean, this dilly-dallying around for 2.5 years now has already done damage.
Are you, Ava, are you normally a Conservative supporter?
Well, I'm definitely right of centre in my views. I do mostly vote Conservative. There are some exceptions, just to make a point. But yeah, I'm disappointed in the way the Conservatives are acting right now. I do think that some of the MPs have their heads in the clouds and think, oh, it's all going to be all right. You know, we just need to accept Mrs. May's deal. Why, if what you've said is true and we can't negotiate with the United States, and I don't know about other countries, if we're free to negotiate with them.
Well, we might be able to negotiate, Ava, but not actually sign anything. And
actually sign anything, so we can't do any other deals.
And the problem is that if we don't manage, if the EU don't give us during the transition period any form of trade agreement that we find acceptable, you know, we could be stuck because of the backstop in the European Union's customs union in perpetuity and never able to sign any other deal. So it is, you know, it's not a great situation. Ava, would you like to see the Prime Minister sack these 3 cabinet rebels?
I understand that she's in a difficult position if she does, because then that might fracture things even more.
Mm-hmm.
But in terms of showing great leadership, positive leadership, I think she should, yes.
Absolutely. Ava, thanks for your call. You're listening to the Sunday edition of the Nigel Farage Show here on LBC, and it's 10:45. There's a lot of talk right across the spectrum now about Article 50 getting extended. This was the Cooper-Bowles amendment that didn't pass last time round, but now we have 3 cabinet ministers in open revolt, basically saying you must take a WTO Brexit off the table. If we do extend this once, I promise you we'll extend it again and again, because the EU won't need to budge 1 single inch, because they'll have us where they want us. We'll still be full members of the European Union. They can point to us, to all the Eurosceptic movements growing across Europe to say, look, this doesn't really work, you're wasting your time. And of course, what it also means is we'll be part of a European Union that, despite the growing opposition, is centralising rapidly and deeply. I mean, just a few weeks ago, the French and Germans signed an update to their original 1963 Élysée Treaty, and they're calling, just as Mr Juncker is, and Verhofstadt and all the others, they want this European Army, Air Force and Navy completed by 2025. They want a state, an empire indeed, based in Brussels, run by the European Commission, and we will still be part of it, and we will get dragged ever more deeply into it. I don't see, with one extension, any prospect of that extension not going to the next general election, probably in 2022, and then the parties will say, trust us. Well, I think by then, trust in our entire political system will be pretty much gone. I think if Mrs May's going to show any leadership whatsoever, she simply has to sack these cabinet ministers. And yes, sure, that may make some of the splits in her own party worse. It may make things in Parliament even more difficult for her. But frankly, things in Parliament are impossible for her anyway, as a loss of 230 votes on her withdrawal agreement showed. But I promise you, if she did that, a remarkable thing would happen. The country would come behind her, and they really would. And that would make a massive difference. Is she going to do it? Well, I doubt it. Tony says 3 rebel remainers in the cabinet must resign. Brexiteers resigned in similar circumstances. Paolo says the EU is too financially intertwined with the EU. The Brexit problem is there's no such thing as no deal. No, there isn't, Paolo, of course, because we're going to fly back and forth from each other's countries, and European companies will need our capital markets, of course. But Brexit isn't about pulling up the drawbridge. But Brexit is about controlling what comes across that drawbridge in terms of people, legislation and everything else. And it's what we voted for, Paolo, in a referendum and in a general election too. Mark is calling from Great Offley in Hertfordshire. Good morning, Mark.
Yeah, Nigel, what short memories everybody has.
Yep.
These 3 cabinet ministers, I'm afraid, they are actually trying to ensure that we get what we voted for in the referendum.
Oh, really?
Yeah, really, because as you may remember, the official Vote Leave campaign took no deal off the agenda. They actually said, and I'm now quoting directly from one of their many leaflets, we will negotiate the terms of a new deal before we start any legal process to leave. So I voted for that. Can I have that, please? I want the deal, and no deal was excluded by the official Vote Leave campaign.
Well, Article 50, Mark, was accepted by everybody that campaigned for leave, accepted that we would go down the Article 50 route, all right? And
no, hang on, I'm not talking about Article 50,
Well,
Nigel.
I am.
I voted that no deal was taken off the table, and we would not leave the EU and start any legal process to leave the EU until the deal had been done. So that's what these 3 cabinet ministers are trying to ensure happens. That's what the official Vote Leave campaign said. I believe you even got on their bus. So
never, Mark.
Can we have what we voted
never,
for?
Mark.
When did that change?
Never, Mark. Never, Mark, is the answer to that. And
did you? Okay, fair enough. But when did that change, Nigel? When was no deal?
Mark, what I campaigned on for the last 2 weeks, if that was no deal is better than a bad deal. Very clear to me. very clear to me.
You weren't the official. No, you weren't the official Vote Leave campaign as set up in our referendum. In the referendum,
well, I think, Mark, to be honest with you, whatever campaign was official or not, I think I had a relatively influential voice in getting this referendum and getting the result.
Nigel, I was listening to the Vote Leave campaign because I was told by government that they were the official people.
Yeah.
They have said they said to millions of people that we would
Mark, the
negotiate
answer is very simple. The answer is very simple, Mark. Had the Prime Minister asked for a free trade deal, she would have got one. And as recently as March the 7th, 2018, actually Donald Tusk offered us a free trade deal along the lines of Canada. Unfortunately, the Prime Minister has completely blurred this process, and we now have a choice under Article 50, Mark, which 498 MPs voted for, and that simply said we have up to 2 years to negotiate a deal or we just leave. And I'm afraid, with 33 days to go, Mark, time has run out. It's time to leave, isn't it?
I'm asking you, when did that change? At which point did we go from no deal is taken off the table? Who or what permission was given by the public to change what we were told
the day 498 MPs voted for Article 50, which said we negotiate a deal or we just leave, and that's where we are. And that's where we are.
All right, okay, so they changed what we voted for in the referendum, so yeah, they can happily, so if they're allowed to make that change, then surely they can make a change on what they want to do with Article 50, be it extend it or revoke it.
But what they're doing actually is they're shooting their own side in the back in these critical days of negotiation, aren't they?
Well, no, they're not. What they're doing, and as somebody who used to run some very large business, some people are taking a pragmatic view that we're not going to have enough time to sort out what we need to sort out before that deadline. I agree with you on one thing. The Prime Minister at the time was told by so many people, do not trigger Article 50 and put 2-year time clock on this. It took several years just to get devolution in this country with countries who were friendly with us because they were on our island.
Well, Mark,
I'm blaming her, but
it took her 9 months. It took her 9 months to trigger Article 50, didn't it?
Well, it may have taken them 9 months, but what I'm saying for what we voted for in the campaign...
Mark, what one leaflet says, right? What one leaflet says from either side of that referendum, or what implication you draw from it, the fact is, people voted leave because they wanted to leave. This wasn't about the terms upon which we left. We voted to leave. And that really has been the argument all the way through.
With respect, Nigel, if people can't be bothered to read what's sent to them, and I read what was sent to me from both sides of that campaign, and they were telling me what I would be getting. I was voting not on just one line that was on the ballot paper. I was voting on all the information I was given. Now, if you're telling me that information was false, then therefore that makes that referendum actually quite void, I think.
Do you know what? There's not been an election in history that you couldn't declare void afterwards because of what happens with circumstances. Mark, there is no way that Leave voters did anything other than vote to leave. That is what they wanted to do. Mark, thank you for your call. Quickly going to go to Andrew in Gospel Oak. Andrew, good morning.
So good morning. These three ministers are actually doing Theresa May's work for her. Steve Baker has already testified in Parliament that when he was a DEXU minister, there was a parallel process of policy development going on. DEXU were coming up with one thing, number 10, which is where Ollie Robbins is. He's not part of DEXU at all. He reports directly into Theresa May. He's a civil servant in number 10. Ollie Robbins was doing one thing in negotiating with the EU, which is completely different to what Steve Baker and David Davis wanted. There was a parallel process of policy development going on, two different policies, and Brexit was being betrayed by the number 10 policy unit because Theresa May, which is basically the Amber Rudd cabal of people as well, wanted as close an alignment with the EU as possible. She wanted Brexit in name only, and not even a nominal
Andrew,
Brexit.
I think you're absolutely right. So, in essence, Amber Rudd is Theresa May's outrider, yeah?
Yeah, that's why she's back in cabinet. Steve Baker has testified all that to a parliamentary select committee, Nigel.
No, I saw it, Andrew. I saw it. We're out of time, folks, on that. Moving on to the next hour. Well, it's been quite a week, hasn't it, with the formation of the independent group, 8 Labour MPs joining, 3 Conservative MPs joining. And I'm wondering, do you think there's space and room for them? Can the independent group become a political success? And if you think, this is the great new fresh hope and start we need in British politics, then call 0345 6060 973. Maybe you think actually our system is too brutal with first past the post, in which case text to 84850. And are there other ways they could win by changing perhaps public opinion, even changing the Labour Party? Please tweet using the hashtag Farage and LBC at LBC. And of course, you can watch us on Facebook Live and you can comment there too. Well, there have been weeks and months, indeed, of speculation about whether some people would leave the Labour Party because they're unhappy with Jeremy Corbyn as leader, they're unhappy with the leftward direction, they're unhappy with some of the sheer aggression that's come back into parts of the Labour Party and, sort of memories, perhaps, of what it was like with Millicent going back to the 1980s, and in particular, unhappy with the never-ending row over anti-Semitism that goes on within the Labour Party, but equally, a lot of them are very, very unhappy because they know that in his heart, Corbyn has always been a leaver, that he's deeply reluctant to take the party towards a second referendum position. And those that left, the 7 of them, then there was one that came afterwards, 8 MPs, Labour MPs, all very strong Remainers, all very keen on having a second referendum. And that, in the sense, is what united them with 3 former Conservatives that joined them. All of those strong Remainers wanting a second referendum, although difficult to see on many other policies what the 8 and 3 frankly have in common, given the different manifestos they stood for at the last general election in 2017. But Chuka Umunna has been presenting this as a big new start in British politics. And here he was talking to Nick Ferrari on LBC earlier on last week.
This horrible, divisive, nasty factional culture, which, often displays a visceral hatred of people with other views, people may voted for other parties, culminating in the ugly spectacle of the anti-Semitism scandal, runs against our values too, which is one of openness, respect for different views. And one of the things I think people find refreshing is when people from different political traditions can actually forge a consensus and work together.
Well, Chuka, in the light of that, and that we all need to be a bit more civilised and talk to people with different points of view, we did invite you, in fact, we invited any of you to come on this morning, have a quick chat with me, but more importantly, of course, to do what all the guests do that come in on Sundays, and that's to talk to the public. And, of course, we've had Alistair Campbell and Andrew Adonis more than once in the studio talking to me and, indeed, taking your calls as well. So I'm very happy on this programme to talk to Remainers or Leavers and to try and do so in a civilised way. Unfortunately, despite this new spirit of openness, nobody from the independent group decided they want to come on LBC this morning and speak to you, which I think is a bit of a shame. But never mind. There are quite a lot of people out there, and some would say that it's all liberal media, some would say it's all the metropolitan elite, but there are many that are saying this is a big new moment in British politics and they were expecting more MPs to join them. I kind of thought to myself, well, I wonder whether with the Sunday papers today we might see a new wave of people joining. But I think what I want to debate this morning with you is, do you think this independent group will succeed? And what does success actually mean? Well, I guess in many ways, will they succeed at the next general election in 2022, or maybe if it happens sooner? But there are, of course, other ways you can succeed in politics. I mean, they could succeed in the way that the SDP succeeded, in that maybe the Labour Party decide they're going to get rid of Corbyn momentum and become a slightly more centrist, more social democratic type of party. I guess the other way in which they could succeed is maybe Chuka and his chums will convince the whole country that what we really need is a second referendum on EU membership. And if they're going to do that, they've got a fair bit of work to do. I think it's going to be very, very hard for them indeed. Firstly, of course, the Liberal Democrats already inhabit this ground, and that makes it pretty tricky. And I was amused to see in today's Sunday Times a piece by John Curtis saying Chuka and his chums really should have talked to Nigel Farage. Now, you may not think we're natural bedfellows. The point being, of course, that I did lead something of an insurgency in this country. And interesting, isn't it? 2014, we've got a European election being contested on the basis of proportional representation. I led UKIP. We got 28% of the vote, and we won. the first time since 1906 that any party that wasn't Labour or Tory had won a national election. But take that forward a year to the first-past-the-post system, and still managing to get 4 million votes, but only one piece of representation in Westminster. So nobody, I don't think anyone alive knows as more than I do how hard it is to break this first-past-the-post system. My view is they will have to merge with the Liberal Democrats or come to an electoral pact with the Liberal Democrats to have any hope whatsoever. And I think they're really going to struggle. But hey, tell me, maybe I've got this wrong. I'm particularly keen to hear from you if they're your MP. So just to remind you, the former Labour members of this group: Luciana Berger, Liverpool Wavertree; Chris Leslie, Nottingham East; Angela Smith, Penistone and Stockbridge; Chuka Umunna, Streatham; Mike Gapes, Ilford South; Anne Coffey, Stockport; Gavin Shuker, Luton South; Joan Ryan, Enfield North; Anna Soubry, Broxtowe; Sarah Wollaston, Totnes; and Heidi Allen, South Cambridgeshire. If you live in any one of those 11 constituencies, I particularly want to hear from you. Would you vote for your member of Parliament under a new brand and a new title, or would you go on voting Labour and Conservative, probably because you dislike one of them a little bit less than you dislike the other one, which I'm struck is what first-past-the-post politics has finished up from giving us. Are they headed for success? I think if we're talking about the next general election, I think if we're talking about a big fresh new start in British politics, I would have thought their chances are pretty limited, to say the least. I think the centre ground is already pretty crowded. I suspect that if there is going to be a big change in British politics, I think it would come actually from the Tories not delivering Brexit, the conversation we had over the course of the last hour. Tell me, are you inspired by Chuka and his chums? Anna is a new caller from Manchester. Good morning, Anna.
Oh, good morning, Nigel. Thank you for taking my call.
Not one bit. So are they headed for a massive political upset and success?
Success, no.
Right. Why?
Well, I actually think what they're doing is very underhanded. They actually left their parties and come under a...
Yeah.
Kind of went private, so they're keeping everything hidden, which to me says that there's some sort of corruption there. And after the EU, I'm afraid I would run the other way rather than vote for them.
Yeah, I mean, it's an interesting point, Anne, isn't it? That here we've got, a breakaway movement that wants to reinforce the establishment rather than to force some fundamental change upon us, which is an unusual starting place, isn't it?
Very unusual. I mean, I've been Conservative all my life.
Yeah.
And I now will never vote Conservative again.
Right, so you're one of those feeling disenchanted from the whole system, but Chuka and his chums, they're not getting your vote, are they?
No way.
No way. All right, Anne, thank you very much indeed. Mark is a new caller from Spalding. Hello, Mark.
Good morning, Nigel. Absolute pleasure to speak to you.
Yeah, good to speak to you. Well, they've got 11 MPs. It's not a bad start, I guess, for their first week.
You say that, but it's SDP2, really, isn't it?
Well, actually, Mark, let's be honest. I mean, the SDP, the leader of the SDP was Roy Jenkins. He'd been Home Secretary. He'd been Chancellor of the Exchequer. He'd been Commission President, the job that Mr Juncker currently has in Brussels. And he was, a giant of post-war politics. David Owen, of course, had been, I think, the youngest Foreign Secretary for 150 years. Shirley Williams was one of the most accomplished relatively early female politicians in the country. And Bill Rogers had also been a cabinet minister. And actually, if you look at this group of people, the honest truth is, Chuka, maybe to some extent, Luciana Berger, Anna Soubry, they may just about be household names, but the rest no one's ever heard of.
Correct. But you say about giants of politics in the SDP, these guys must be like the minnows of politics. They're all self-serving hypocrites. They all campaign for a people's vote, and yet none of them will face their election, to obviously get a mandate for actually doing what they're doing. But I actually have another question regarding the independent group for you, Nigel. I don't know if you can answer this or not. The independent group is a limited company. It is not a political party registered by the Electoral Commission. Why on earth are they allowed to enter the Houses of Parliament? I mean, I have a limited company. I'm sure I couldn't just walk in there and say, with no mandate from anyone, I'd like to sit here, please, and vote.
Well, the argument to that, I guess, Mark, is they're in the House of Parliament already, and it's just the designation that they've changed. But you're quite right, and this is the important thing, is the independent group is not registered with the Electoral Commission as a political party. I don't even know whether it's put a registration request in. I just don't know.
And it really concerns me because they haven't effectively crossed the floor. They have effectively left the House of Commons because they haven't defected to another political party. They've defected to a group that's a limited company, which is and why they're allowed to sit is just absolutely beyond me.
Well, political parties often use limited companies. I have in the past, and if I ever have to, I will again in the future. And there are good reasons for doing that. But at the same time, all of that is registered with the Electoral Commission, and that, of course, means, given the regulation these days, that of course means that you have to declare sources of income over a certain amount, which at the minute they don't need to. So, Mark, that's where we are. Let's see if they do become a political party, Mark. And thank you for your call. And Mark raises the question of companies and money. Well, interestingly, Sir David Garrard, property tycoon who gave £1.5 million to a Labour Party under the days of Tony Blair, Gordon Brown and Ed Miliband, has said that he's going to support this independent group. And there are one or two other business figures, some that have been funding the Lib Dems, some that have even funded the Tories in the past, who say they are going to give them some support. So they're not going to struggle necessarily to get money. But is there really room in the centre ground for a new force in British politics? Or maybe you think we need a centrist party, even though across the whole of Europe at the moment, parties of the centre are somewhat disappearing. But tell me, are they going to succeed? And if you think this is a bright new start in British politics, then let me know. On 0345 6060 973. You're listening to The Nigel Farage Show here on LBC. It's 11:15. Is there really room for a new centre party in politics? Are we going back to the days of Cameron and perhaps Miliband? Or is it a fresh new start in British politics? Well, they'll be mildly encouraged that a piece of polling today in the Mail on Sunday says at the moment they're registering on 11%, with the Lib Dems as low as 5%. But I think this is all very fluid. Is there really the space here for a new party that can concentrate its support and win seats in significant numbers at the 2022 general election? And I just don't think there is. I also don't think they're going to find there is a massive public appetite out there for a second referendum on membership of the European Union. But maybe I've got it all wrong. Grynice is a new caller from Croydon. Good morning.
Hello, good morning. Yes, good morning.
Welcome.
Did you say for the did you say for the European Party just now?
What I said was that the new party may find that their enthusiasm for a second referendum doesn't resonate with that larger number of people.
I was focusing on the new people from Labour, that new party, the independent.
Yeah, the independent group, with Chuka Umunna, and clearly what unites them, with Anna Soubry and the other two from the Tory party, what unites them is, their belief that Brexit's a huge mistake and we should have a second referendum. And I know some.
Well, I'm not keen on the second referendum. Right. I'm not keen on that. But the new party I'm interested in, because all this is predictable. We are just human, it's going to go this way. I just want to call out for some breathing space, give things a chance, just see the contradictions. Because, like I said, it's predictable. And when they spoke and shared their stories, it's for us to have a chance to dig deeper, look for our values and see what we're holding on to make sure the right people are there to support us. That's what I want.
So they struck you as being nice, decent people, yeah?
Well, the stories seem real. There was more diversity amongst them. They came from working parents. They studied. They did this. They joined the party for certain reasons. It came real. It drew me towards them. That's what I'm saying. I'm not saying I support them. I definitely don't want another
referendum. No, okay, no, but you found their stories appealing, and to a large extent they were getting. They said they were leaving a Labour Party that had become very aggressive, very nasty, and anti-Semitic. And you're quite right, Granice. They did talk very much about values at that conference, but I'm afraid when it starts to come to policy, I think they're going to struggle a bit more. Thank you for your thoughts and your call. Ben is a regular from Bristol. Good morning, Ben.
Calling you again from Babylon.
Hello,
Bristol, Nigel.
Hi there.
Seems like a while since we spoke, but what a glory! In these times of turmoil, Nigel, what a glorious thing it was to see Anna Soubry leave the Tory party. I rejoiced. It was a great and glorious day.
I did ask John Redwood that earlier. I did ask John Redwood earlier whether he was heartbroken that she'd left the Tory party, but he wasn't playing ball on it. Well,
it was magnificent. But what was she talking about? She said the Tories are run by the ERG and they're a far-right party. I thought, if only that were true, but if she thinks it, if that's what's made her go, then I don't mind.
Well.
Bye, Anna. Now and I don't think that Chuka Umunna went to bed grinning from cheek to cheek to know that he'd have to deal with she's your problem now, Chuka. Look, this new party, Nigel, they're just a bunch of people who despise democracy. Who like to talk slick and act kind of cool and trendy, but that's really what they are. And to me, I mean, I kind of came more to the right side of politics later in life. I want a Tory party without people like Anna Soubry in it. I don't need all people like that. And I want people like Jake. If she's worried about she's based on people like Jacob Rees-Mogg, that's what most Tory voters want. They want somebody like that. They don't want people like Anna Soubry. We're actually glad to see them go. But there are a lot of other Anna Soubrys in the Tory party, ideologically, and that was reflected in the votes. That this party needs to be refined down back to its roots. I heard Jacob a couple of years ago. I'd never heard of the bloke before, and he said something really struck me. He said, "Conservatism done properly is really good. It's really good for a country." And I was struck by his clarity on that. I mean, because so many voters like me, we feel disenfranchised by what the Tories.
No, well, I
really
know that's right. That's right. And of course, the real failing, Ben, in Soubry's argument, that when those 7 Labour MPs held that press conference, or some said therapy session, when they talked about all the difficulties they were having with Corbyn and Labour, and I think in the case of Luciana Berger, it's difficult for us not to feel quite a degree of sympathy for some of the horrible ways in which she'd been treated. But the point was, Ben, that when they said that the Labour Party has moved hard to the left, that it's changed in its demeanour in many ways, we could all look at that and say, yep, we're with you. But when Soubry says that the Tory party's become far right, because all the ERG want to do is to make sure the 2017 manifesto is actually put into place.
Crazy.
I mean, there is no comparison. It's nuts. Ben, I can see that you see the independent group potentially as having a useful cleansing potential for the Tory party.
Inadvertently, but at the same time, you see, they reflect something in politics. There's bound to be a party like that because nature abhors a vacuum. We live in such times of sensitivity to people and trying to please people that there was bound to be a party that would emerge that would directly go for that. You try to please people all the time. At the end of the day, the fear of man proves to be a snare. I mean, look at the SDP.
But what's wrong with the Lib Dems, Ben? What's wrong with the Lib Dems?
Well, they're just a tired brand. But the thing is, when the SDP did this back in the 80s, it was popular and they were riding high in the polls. But when it came to the election, they got whacked.
Yeah.
They didn't make any massive impact at all, and they had much more potent political figures than this part. I mean, when these guys Jacob said it perfectly on Friday. He said the thing is, it looks like we could hopefully be out of Europe by this time in a couple of months. This party's going to have nothing to stand on.
I heard him say that. I heard him say that, and I agree with that totally. So you think their chances of success, whatever happens with Brexit, are pretty limited?
You see, the problem is that the Labour vote. I mean, here in Babylon, Bristol, you see, it's a miscalculation because they love Corbyn here. The Liberals, they love Corbyn, and they won't easily turn on him. Even for a new party that's promising what they want to do, the Liberal masses here in Bristol, it'll just split the vote.
Okay.
I don't see it going anywhere.
Ben, thank you very much indeed. I'm up to Blackpool to speak to Robert. Good morning, Robert.
Hi, Nigel. Thanks for taking the call again.
Not at all.
Regarding this independent party.
Well, Robert, at the moment, it's just a group, but it could become a party. All right.
Yeah, okay. But was it not all about anti-Semitism to start with? And now that seems to have been pushed to the sidelines, and it's about a second referendum.
Well, I don't think for one moment that three Conservatives would have joined a protest group against Jeremy Corbyn's party being anti-Semitic. So no, it is actually about stopping Brexit and having a second referendum. That's really what it's about.
I agree completely. Can I also take the opportunity to ask you why nobody in the House of Commons is talking more about Article 24 and leaving it on world trade terms? And why we've had 2.5, almost 3 years to do this, but nothing seems, apart from you.
What I do know, Robert, is that people have been into Number 10 Downing Street. They briefed the Prime Minister face to face on Article 24 of the GATT Treaty. What I also know, despite you being told the opposite by some people, is that the WTO in Geneva are happy to act as this honest broker. And the reason the government isn't using this and talking about it more seriously is it's pretty clear to me the government just don't really want to do this.
So effectively, Theresa May, for the last 2.5, almost 3 years, is going to deliver Brexit in name only, as you said. For all intents and purposes, she may as well have been sat there having a cup of tea, saying to the European Union, don't worry, we're not really leaving. Don't worry about it.
Well, I'm afraid Brexit in name only is where we're going at the moment. But Robert, I've got to move on. I'm going to speak to Peter in Enfield. Good morning, Peter.
Oh, good morning, Nigel. Nice to speak to you. First-time caller to you.
Welcome.
And I've joined your party, and I hope you get in.
Right. Well,
the thing is.
But we're not talking about that. We're talking about the independent group this morning.
Right. This independent. Yeah. Joan Ryan's at my I'm in Joan Ryan's constituency.
Okay.
Here,
yeah.
And there's no way that I would vote for. And I think the reason that she won't have a by-election is the fact she has actually been voted out once, and the Conservatives gone. It's been mainly a Labour stronghold up here, but the last sort of few elections, the Conservatives have actually gone. But there's no way I could vote for her now. I think it's total betrayal.
Does she have, in your opinion, a high profile as a person in that constituency?
She has in a way for the Turkish community.
Okay.
But as for everybody else, I'm not so sure. I mean, she's only ever knocked on my door once, and I do get the occasional letter from her to have coffee mornings and that. But I think she's got her own agenda, to be perfectly honest with you, Nigel.
So at the next election, given that it's a swing seat, people are more likely to go Labour or Conservative than they are to vote for.
I think they go Conservative, to be honest with you.
Interesting. Peter, thank you very much indeed. And this is the thing, a lot of MPs have the impression that a lot of the votes they get are personal votes. It's a load of old baloney. That may have been the case decades ago, but increasingly our system is presidential. And we vote for the Conservative Party because we don't like the Labour leader, or we vote Labour because we don't like the Tory leader. There's a lot of negative voting actually going on out there. And the personal vote of most of our members of Parliament, probably maximum 1,500 to 2,000 votes per constituency. MPs have a massively overinflated idea of their own self-importance. That's at least my experience of all of this. You're listening to the Sunday edition of the Nigel Farage Show. It's 11:30 and time for the news headlines with Philip Chrysikos. One of the reasons that the UKIP insurgency was allowed to happen and catapulted us to 28% in the European elections and 4 million votes in the general election is I was able to say over and over and over, if you look at the Tory and Labour parties, you can't put a cigarette paper between them. And that was pretty much true on policy, on pretty much everything. Since then, things have changed. We've got a Labour Party that's way out to the left, and that gives a gap between them and a Conservative Party who, at least in public, say, through their leader, that they support Brexit. So is there now a huge appetite? Well, one of our previous callers said when there's a vacuum in the centre, it's not surprising that someone fills it. Although the Liberal Democrats are there trying to fill it, and any success that this new group has, as and when it becomes a party, it clearly would have to merge or do an electoral deal with the Liberal Democrats. But in this country, and actually right across the whole of Europe, the centre is collapsing as people are now opting for a politics that gives a real ideological choice. Are they really on the road to success? And I have to say, I really seriously doubt it. Paul says to me, I first thought good, Labour rejecting the awful Corbyn regime, but turns out they're all second referendum advocates. Confirmed when the three Tories joined. Carswell and Reckless were honourable when they left the Tories and joined UKIP because they held by-elections. And you know what, Paul? Absolutely right. It's very principled what both of those people did back in 2014. There's no chance of any by-elections here. Colin says the Independent Group are a novel, one-minute wonder, attempting to frustrate Brexit. Without clear and concise policies, no one will vote for them, and they will get pasted in the next election. Anna Soubry will be gladly missed, it says with irony. Roll on WTO 24. Well, if the Prime Minister wanted to do that, I guess she could, but I've not had much indication. And Terry says, as soon as the media spotlight moves away from the TIG and back to the more important business of Brexit, they'll all be forgotten about. And Terry, you do raise a good point, and that perhaps is why these sort of snap polls show they have made an impact, is that in fact there has been an absolute tidal wave of media coverage of this story this week, which is not surprising because it is the biggest fracture we've seen for several decades. Angela is a new caller from Worcester. Angela, good morning.
Good morning. How are you, Nigel?
I'm well. Now, do you think this group can achieve real success, Angela?
Ultimately, I don't. Right. And I'll tell you why. And I don't know if other people will see this. Chuka Umunna said something along the lines, when they had their press conference about how they want to breathe new life and fresh blood into politics and everything else. But then what surprises me is they're appealing to politicians from the very establishments that they're saying are no longer any good to join them. So what is that going to then turn them into?
Yes.
Do you know what I mean?
No, Angela, I do know what you mean, and that's why I was so keen to get one of them on this programme this morning, because I'm struck that what they've done so far is talk to lots of other politicians, talk to journalists. I'm not sure they've actually been out and spoken to the public yet, Angela.
Exactly. I don't think they have, and that's another thing where I think you seem pretty in touch with what's happening on the ground. Why is it no other politician is? I don't... Why is that?
Well, Angela, I can give you a sort of jokey answer to that, because I spend more time in pubs than other politicians. Which used to be true. It's less true these days, I have to say, because when you get to a certain age, you have to slow down, Angela, I'm afraid. But
wow.
You clearly haven't got there yet. But no, I do agree with this, because actually, doesn't Chuka Umunna, doesn't he represent that very metropolitan elite that people have increasingly been rejecting?
Well, he does. And I think he could be another sort of semi-Theresa May, somebody who could have got it oh so right and then got it oh so wrong.
Well, it's interesting because he was rumoured, wasn't he, to be running for the leadership of the Labour Party a few years ago, and it's sort of for 24 hours his hat was in the ring, and then suddenly it wasn't. So, Angela, you're pretty pessimistic about their chances, yeah?
No, I don't think so. I think you're right. They're going to have a bit of popular, but and the way to kill it, I know everybody doesn't want it, would be to call a general election now, and then they'll be done for,
They would be. Not one of them. Not one of them, Angela, would save their seats, would they?
No.
Not a chance. No, Angela, thank you very much indeed. I'm going to Ashford in Kent to speak to Michelle, another new caller to the show. Good morning, Michelle.
Good morning, Nigel.
So, what chance are they going to break the mould of British politics? Is there a big new fresh start coming, Michelle?
I think they're going to be as good as the Liberal Democrats.
Well, the Liberal Democrats, of course, did go into coalition government in 2010, but they're not in that position now, are they?
No, and to be honest with you, I don't even agree that they should be where they are now. They got their seats as Labour and Conservative MPs.
Yep.
They are no longer Labour and Conservative MPs.
No, I agree with that. And actually, Michelle, the Liberal Democrats have something that these people don't have. The Liberal Democrats have branches. The Liberal Democrats have structure. The Liberal Democrats have organisers. The Liberal Democrats have press officers. And you know something, Michelle? The Liberal Democrats are actually very good at campaigning on the ground. And these people have got no structure at all, have they?
No, they're defectors, really, aren't they? They wanted change. They wanted to change European Union within, but can't change their own parties within.
I love that argument when Chucker said there's no point staying within something and trying to reform it when you realise you can't, which of course led me to think that that's why Brexit actually made sense when it came to the European debate. So you think you see them as having a very short future in British politics, yeah?
Yeah, I don't think they should have any future anyway. I really do believe that they should be absolutely now just kicked off because they didn't get these seats as individuals. They got these seats as Conservative and Labour MPs. They are no longer Conservative and Labour MPs. You
say that with some passion, Michelle. You think they've really abused the system, do you?
Yeah, I do. And I just think Remainers are hitting below the belt and, doing things that maybe they shouldn't be doing just to get their own way. Well, I think it's everything just to stop Brexit.
Yeah, and of course, Michelle, with 33 days to go, they're likely to get more and more desperate, aren't they, as that date approaches? I know. And
you had a caller on earlier that said that he voted for what was in the mandate. That said we were going to get a deal. Well, I didn't. I voted for. Well, I prefer no deal. And even Mrs May said, no deal is better than a bad deal. Well, hers is a bad deal.
Yeah, he quoted from something that was put on a vote leave leaflet. I have to say, I never ever saw it.
That's right.
But
no, I didn't. And I read them thoroughly.
But what was absolutely certain was that there was no confusion that when we voted to leave the European Union, the single market and the customs. It could not have been clearer. Michelle, thank you for your call. Great passion there from Ashford in Kent. Nigel, I can see every single one of those MPs losing their seats as soon as they have to stand against a candidate from their former parties. It would split their previous vote in two. That's why they won't hold by-elections. Yeah, Chris, I think that's absolutely right. I don't see any of them holding their seats. I genuinely don't. I know how difficult this is. I know how tough it is to break the first-past-the-post system. The success of the Liberal Democrats is they've managed to concentrate their support in a few constituencies, which has kept them alive in Westminster terms. To replicate that without first winning council seats, building up branches and building up some profile on the ground is, I'm going to argue this actually, it's impossible. It can't be done. You have to build up on the ground. You have to. This was the Paddy Ashdown strategy. Start to win council seats, start to get in the local newspapers every single week, start to build a local following, and then, and only then, have you got a catch chance in hell of winning a seat in either a by-election or a general election. And Ashdown, recently departed Ashdown, did that job as leader of the Liberal Democrats absolutely brilliantly. For this independent group, which, and who's to say, I don't know whether they've got an application in to become a party, I guess they have, they're simply not going to have time to do that. Deborah is a new caller from Bolton. Good morning to you.
Hi, Nigel. How are you?
I am well, thank you. So far, Deborah, a lot of people are being very pessimistic about the chances of this new group. What do you think?
Well, I actually think that they're very divisive. I mean, when you look at the registration in Companies House, Gavin Shuker set the company up on the 16th of January. So that's a full month ago. Now, that's modus operandi, isn't it? Setting into place. So, yeah, I think they're going to succeed in being divisive, Nigel. Whether they're going to succeed in personality stakes, it's a bit like having an old mattress and turning it over, expecting to get a bit of new life out of it, and finding it's just as stained on the other side, isn't it? Let's face it. There's nothing new there that's going to appeal to anybody. It's just a rehash of the same old trouts coming out to vocalise and hoping that they're going to create a party that they can re-engage themselves with and get a bit more shelf life out of themselves with. It's a party full of egos and has-beens. Now, my problem, and I'm trying to find an answer to, Nigel, and maybe you can, maybe you're the way I find the answer to this, and that is, if they're a company and they've registered as a company with Companies House, then how can they sit in Parliament? Surely there's some sort of business conflict going on there. Surely business shouldn't be represented in Parliament.
No, I don't think the fact that a political party has a registered company through which it sells hats and cushions or whatever it does, and is allowed through doing that to put reasonable expenses against it, I don't think that's a problem.
And they've got trademarks and things like that.
I don't think that's a problem at all. That isn't the problem. I guess the argument right now that's the problem is that people, such as wealthy Labour donors, can currently give money to that limited company. Oh, that was a horrendous noise. What on earth was that? Gone. We lost the line. That was a shame. That was a good conversation. A lot of you asking this question. So the limited company can receive money, but can that limited company spend that money on political activity without that being declared to the Electoral Commission? Well, the answer is no, it can't. But they cannot stand in elections, and it would not say the independent group on the ballot paper until they are a registered political party. And at the moment, they are not. You're listening to the Sunday edition of the Nigel Farage Show here on LBC. The time is now 11:45. Chucker and Chums have set up the independent group this week, and I'm asking you, are they on the road to success? And so far, a lot of you are being pretty negative about it, including me. But if you think I've got this wrong, then please, 0345 6060 973. And we've talked a bit about this centre ground idea. Graham says, Nigel, I thought there was a centre party, but they're so insignificant, I've forgotten who they are. Ah, yeah, that's right, bloke named Cable has something to do with them. A new centre party will soon become as boring. Daniela says, the Brexit issue is allowing the bullying, racism and anti-Semitism in the Labour Party to pass unchecked. That's the real issue in my mind. Really? Why would the Brexit issue be allowing that to go unchecked? I don't get that, Daniela. I don't understand that in any way at all. Amy says, Nigel, I'm a young person in Joan Ryan's constituency. That's one of the TIG group. And I think it's ideal that she's abandoned the Labour Party. She has a low profile in my part of Enfield, which typically votes Conservative, but there's now an opportunity for a new Labour candidate to represent the area. Amy, I think that's right. And I think... And I repeat this point I made earlier, and I'll no doubt there'll be MPs listening thinking I'm talking absolute nonsense. But the truth is, the personal vote of individual candidates for the big parties is actually pretty tiny these days, and they delude themselves that all those people went out and voted because they think they're terribly nice men or women. Actually, it's an increasingly presidential system, and that's what tends to decide how people vote. And more often than not because you like the Tory leader, but because you don't like the Tory leader, or the other way round. Chris is a new caller from Montpellier in France. Good morning.
Good morning, Nigel. Well, I think what we saw last week was not so much a firework display as a few 1950s jumping crackers. An irrelevant sideshow, and at the present time there are more important things going on. If they want to express their ideas, they can either stand on their feet in the House or chat with the likes of Adam Bolton and Bess Rigby extremely easily, more than once a week. And there are more important things going on, in my opinion.
Are you suggesting that some of our broadcast media give those who are focusing on a second referendum too much airtime?
No, because the fact is that what has been going on, there have been a lot of occasions when they've all been outside in College Green simply because of Brexit. Otherwise, it would not have been happening.
Okay.
One other thing, Nigel. There's a retired public employee over here 15 years.
Yep.
Now with dual nationality, you can guess why. I am unable to vote. I really think in this day and age we don't have the latest news on parchment telling us that Guy Fawkes has been eliminated. We should be allowed our votes.
Yeah, this 15-year rule, Chris, is something that does annoy a lot of people living abroad. The counter-argument, of course, is, Chris, you're not currently paying UK taxes.
Yes, I am, because under the dual taxation system, if you have a public service public sector pension, the ruling is, between France and here, that I pay income tax on my teacher's pension, but my state pension is taxed over here.
Interesting. Chris, I think you've got a very valid case to say you should have a vote, and thank you for that call. Separate subject, but very interesting point that was raised there. John is a new caller from Yetminster in Dorset. Good morning to you.
Good morning, Nigel. You were talking about the centre ground.
Yes.
I don't know how much room there is for egos, because all this group are ego-driven. Chuka Umunna famously said in the past, trying to find a club for the right kind of person. Eddie Allen describes anybody who voted Brexit as jihadis. You ought to put a mirror in your studio, because I was watching Anna Soubry talking to callers, and she was gurning. And my God, you know,
John, did some common people call her? You mean sort of Leave voters who weren't as intelligent as her?
Well, you could see by the way she was gurning. She dismissed them before she'd even bothered to process their question.
Well,
and in the midst of all these egos, Nigel, who's going to take charge? Because they all think they should be in charge.
I don't know the answer to that, but I mean, I suppose that, you know, you could finish up with a new group and some sort of huge power battle going on. But I do know what you mean. There is a certain type in politics today who do literally, when they meet a leaver, I mean, look at them and curl their lip as if they're meeting a lower life form. John, you know, the further west we go in England, of course, the more there is a tradition for voting for Liberal parties or voting sort of against Westminster. But do you see them having any resonance in your part of the world?
No, because each one of them is interviewed. They talk voting with their conscience, and certainly Philip Lee, BBC gave them a saying about honour and everything else. Conscience implies a moral dimension. If there is a moral dimension and they believe in democracy, why won't they extend that democracy, which they advocate to the second, for their constituents who voted Labour? As you say, they didn't vote for a person. I can't imagine anybody who'd vote for Soubry as a person, except
you don't know, John. You don't know. There are different types out there, but I think that's right, and I think that the truth of it is, John, that MPs' personal votes are tiny these days, and that condemns them. John, thank you. Now, Paul says, Nigel, you're underestimating the independents. They have millions of Remain voters on their side. They only need a leader and some backers, and they're in power. Look at Macron. Didn't take him long. Paul, I really don't think the Macron example works. And I have to say, by the way, that Macron's personal rating now is even lower at this stage of the presidency than Hollande's was. It's the lowest ever. It's, you know, this Macron premiership's not working at all. Now, there was a spark there with Macron, but Paul, there's a big difference in French politics. In French politics, parties come and go. You know, conservative parties come and go every 20 years in French politics. We have had, you know, since the end of the First World War, two dominant parties in English politics. And bear in mind, you know, that England, for the sake of this conversation, is 85% of the population of the UK. I also think that already you've got the Liberal Democrats in this ground. You've got a Labour Party who are moving towards a position of endorsing a second referendum, at least for now. You know, Tom Watson moving in that direction, McDonnell very much moving in that direction. Only so long Corbyn can hold off his own parliamentary party. So if a Labour Party is advocating a second referendum, and Liberal Democrats are advocating a second referendum, what room is there for an independent group advocating a second referendum? Paul, you may be right. I may be completely wrong about this, but I just don't see it. Rose is a new caller from Axminster. Good morning, Rose.
Good morning, Nigel. I just want to first of all say we as a country owe you a great debt of gratitude. But my feeling is that this group, in a way, there's a positive and negative, because we need to clear out of the dead wood. And we've seen this independence. Really, it's about Corbyn and the stand and the fact that they want a second referendum. I don't think they have actually decided to go back to the electorate who voted them in the first place to actually find out that the electorate will probably not vote them in on the next general election, and they'll be in no man's land, which probably isn't a bad thing, because I don't want to listen to Anna Soubry or Chuka Umunna any longer on an issue that was voted by the country overwhelmingly to leave the European Union. It's very simple. We want to leave without a deal because May has managed to mess it up so badly that actually it's working in our favour. We just have to trip along.
And Rose, if we did leave on March the 29th, as we're due to, if the Prime Minister is right in what she says, then actually the room for this independent group's pretty limited, isn't it? Because I think to call for a referendum to rejoin the European Union after we've left, I think that would be something that would take many, many years to build up any significant level of support. Rose, you sound like somebody who's disenchanted with the whole of politics.
Absolutely. We need a new, and also with technology now, we're all the more educated, and we're not really going to stand any longer for people telling us that we didn't really know what we voted for. Actually, what we voted for was to get out of the bureaucracy of non-elected European Union officials who are on a gravy train on our money.
But Rose, you didn't really vote to leave the single market, did you?
I did vote to leave the single market, leave the customs union and trade with the rest of the world.
I was teasing you there, of course I was. I can tell that you know exactly what you voted for, as indeed did I, Rose, as indeed to virtually everybody, in my opinion, who voted leave. And I thank you very much indeed for your call. You'll be listening to the Sunday edition of the Nigel Farage Show here on LBC. I'll be back tomorrow night at 6. Another exciting week coming up. At 3 o'clock this afternoon, it's Ian Payne. But next on LBC, standing in for Majid Nawaz, who was horribly attacked earlier this week. Not good. It's Aisha Hazarika.
Coming up later, it's the 20th anniversary of the Macpherson report into the murder of Stephen Lawrence, which branded the Metropolitan Police institutionally racist. Do you think anything has changed? Before that, Justin Welby says we need to pray for the poor as they face the biggest risks posed by Brexit uncertainty. Is the church right to get involved? But first, I'll be joined by the former Labour MP Luciana Berger and talking to her about